So what I want you to do is, if you want to ask a question, stick your hand up, and when I acknowledge you, tell me which member of the panel you want to direct a question to. That's reasonable. And any other member of the panel also has the option of hitchhiking on your question, whether you direct a question to them or not. But you've got to direct it to somebody. That would be good. And so it would be good if you can come up to the mic, because if you don't come up to the mic, your response will not be on our video. It's entirely up to you whether you want to be anonymous, airbrushed into oblivion. I hope not. Questions, please. Okay. Which speaker do you want to ask?
Matthew Keeley.
Matthew Keeley?
Yes. Thanks for that, David. I want to direct my question to Matthew Keeley because I think he's the most conservative member of the panel. The whole presentation tonight, I think, has pointed out that the regulators of the internet and the laws are the most conservative people in society, and they seem to be out of step with the general community. Now, the internet is a mass communication medium, and some of the speakers have pointed out the futility of trying to censor that information. Now, I'd like Matthew Keeley to give his opinion on whether the internet should be censored, and can it be censored, and if so, to what degree, and what effectiveness would that have?
I'm only aware of the proposal for an internet filter as a form of censorship, and the information that I have available to me suggests that it just doesn't work. So to that extent, it concurs with the views already mentioned here tonight. I'm not, however, of the view that the pornography, for example, or some forms of pornography should not be subject to censorship. And yet I'm not aware of any way in which a workable form of censorship can be obtained. I don't think I particularly like being called the most conservative member of the panel, but it's never been an accusation, never been previously. But I think in addressing your question, I find myself I guess, in the middle of two spaces. I think I find myself, frankly, in the middle of our speakers, sharing some of the concerns about hardcore porn and the mainstreaming of porn and its availability, whether one searches for it or arrives upon it accidentally, any particular implications of that for young minds. I do indeed recognise the points raised by Helen, that early and frequent exposure to pornography, which may not be of the kind that she mentioned our Father's Day. I was not fortunate enough to find my father's stash, and he's now not with us, so I certainly won't leave that label with him. But I suspect that Helen's right in that assertion, and so I do share both the concern about that issue, a natural desire, I think, to protect young minds from that material, but an inability to offer you any approach to a targeted form of censorship that would work, given that the internet filter is one which I do not think will work.
Now, who's next in line, please? Don't be modest. I'll see a forest of hands sticking up. Yourself, Matt. Who are you directing your question to?
To Helen.
Oh, sure.
I think I'm loud enough.
Yes, you are.
My question is, how do you think will the relationship of the youth to their parents develop with all this modern technology? I mean, when I look at the mobile phones, they now actually impact on family life. When I have a discussion with I have 3 sons, I can hardly enjoy a continuous conversation without being interrupted by a mobile phone call arriving, you know, and ringing, or, you know, with all sorts of sounds. And so how will that develop? I mean, okay, I'm using the internet, and I have my own website, and I send emails to my sons when I have important links to share with them, things like that. But I find the mobile phone particularly disturbing in family life. Have you any idea how that will develop in the future?
It's not really what my talk was on, but
you
hit a raw nerve, I must say.
No, I'm addressing it to you because you're a School of Social Sciences. You know, so I thought maybe you have.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about my students who seem incapable of sitting for an hour without getting out their mobiles, and I find it most distracting. But this isn't about my talk, and it's probably a rather unrelated issue, but I find it very, very distracting. And I also find it, while I'm pretty kind of thin-skinned, thick-skinned, I should say, I think it's very rude for the other students in class to bring up your mobile and just sit there tapping away at it. And I actually asked my colleagues through a group email, I said, what do you do about mobiles in class? Students seem quite shameless about them these days. They just get them out and use them all through the class, you know, through a tutorial when they're supposed to be talking to their peers and so forth. And somebody replied to me and said, well, perhaps we should not have them in meetings. And another person said, perhaps we should stop the dean using his mobile in meetings. And it really sort of, you know, then later on last week I actually had a meeting where I was talking about overseas students and the leaflets that we go out to them. And I said we should put on, the university has a policy that students should be using mobiles in classes, and I said we should put that on these leaflets that go to students. And somebody, it was unbelievable to me, he said, yes, I think that's a really good idea, they're a real plague. And then he got back to me, you know, and he texted, he had no kind of knowledge of himself. But look, it's not really that, it's really just an observation, it's really not my area of expertise, and I only have my own experience, not, you know, scientific research to back it up, but I can tell you it annoys me greatly. But it's not really on the topic of my talk, though, sorry. Or my experience.
Thank you very much.
I have a comment.
Okay, and that is yourself. Come up, who are you wishing to?
Mr. Patterson.
The Patterson?
Yes. I think you could hear me.
I can.
It won't be on the video.
As a resident, a stone throw from King's Cross, I go shopping there, I go to the bank, and so on, and I go to McDonald's in First Road. And I found that some sex workers, or even they bring even their little children to McDonald's, and while they are there, they have on mobile phones discussions with clients or somebody just needs, and as a police man, can you tell me if that is controlled or something? And they're always there, bring the little children, and nobody seems to worry about.
I'll try and offer something in that regard. It's probably more, I think, for Elena to respond to. I think, I mean, in relation to child protection laws, obviously there are laws about exposing children to inappropriate material. But I mean, I think simply for a mother to have her child with her and be discussing her normal life business, I don't think that's somewhere, unless the child is at some risk of harm, I don't think that's somewhere where the law should be interfering. I think it does come back to the points that Elena was making. Those sort of laws, if we bring them in, start to infringe on human rights and sex workers.
Thanks, Helen. One is watching the children.
Thanks awfully.
Well, sex workers have families too, so.
Thanks awfully. Right, here we go. Now, who's yourself? Which
Well, just to the panel in general.
the panel can respond in general.
Yeah, there's been a focus on tonight on pornography, but there are many other things in communication on the internet which could, like to me, prostitution and the solution in New South Wales was a sort of a moral question, and the government decided we won't regulate on moral grounds, we'll treat it as business. It's just like any other business. Residential shop, it has to be in the right place, has to comply with certain rules and regulations. But the moral question will be ignored. We've had a lot of talk about that tonight, but what I'm just interested in a more general view of the internet is you can have all sorts of things on the internet, such as how to blow up this building. So, terrorist type activity. There's a whole range of things which are not sort of moral questions. They're, is it good or is it bad? That sort of issue arises. Good, this is a good thing, and that's a bad thing. So someone has to decide on what is good and what is bad. And if someone wants to regulate, or like they do with the movies, they put classifications on the movies, a group of people have to look at it and decide which category it belongs into, which is a way of saying it's good or bad, I guess, in my mind. So it just seems to me that we haven't really come to grips with the fundamental question that we can either do nothing, and anything goes, you can watch whatever you like, pornography, how to blow up the building, anything you like. It's just like having a personal conversation with another person. Or you can say, we as a society, all of us, can say, hang on, we're not comfortable with that. We want to have things classified as good or bad and put some controls on the bad things. So it might be just a password. You have to enter the password to look at it. I don't know what I'm not sure whether we've actually got the answer. That could be part of the problem. Maybe there is no answer. One of the speakers has said all these filters don't work. So it could be that there is no answer to the issue of what we're talking about, a challenge to youth, which I interpret to be young people. So the question is, are we really at a point where there is no answer? And then on the other hand, what does the panel think if we decide we want to do something? Does any of the panel members have any suggestions on who are going to be the deciders on what gets classified as good and what gets classified as bad? Would anybody like to comment on any of that?
Who would like to take up? Okay, Elena.
Yes, I'd just like to reiterate that in Australia, communication already is highly regulated. Communicating about sex in particular ways, such as the example I draw in Queensland, is highly regulated, and people every week are getting criminal records for it, whether it's done verbally, whether it's done in handwriting with a note, whether it's done on a phone, or whether it's done on the internet. It's already regulated and highly criminalised, and in order to regulate it, police have to pose and entrap people. Similarly, the Amendments to Communication and Surveillance Devices Acts in Australia, when anti-terrorism laws were brought in, also regulate the discussion of a range of topics that have been arbitrarily linked to terrorist acts. It is illegal to discuss those topics in Australia. It is illegal to share that information in writing, whether it be in physical form, or whether it be online, or whether it be on the internet. And people have gone to jail for that in Australia already. So I think what you're saying, what you're doing is you're isolating the internet as something separate and unregulated. But actually, the laws that already regulate areas of communication in Australia include communication on the internet.
Yes. I would just like to
Hang on,
add...
just a minute. Does anybody else want to follow that through? Yeah.
That's all right. I think there's a little bit of a fallacy here, that one of the fallacies in the discussions about how freedom of speech relates here, I've got two things to say, and I might not get to the second one, but the first one that I'd say is that the main threat to freedom of speech is often construed in these discussions as the government, the state, the law. Now, we know enough from the actions and the events of the last 3 months to know that the government and the state and the law aren't the only threats to freedom of speech. They aren't the only threats to the privacy of people. They aren't the only threats to the lives of people. We know that threats can come from private enterprise just as effectively, if not more effectively, than the state and the government. I'm thinking about our compatriot, our former compatriot, Rupert Murdoch, for example. These threats don't always come from the government. And I'll remind you that this is not a new thing. This is John Stuart Mill, one of my great heroes, I must say. John Stuart Mill, throughout the 19th century, reminded people that the chief threat, in his view at that time, the chief threat to liberty, the liberty of speech in particular, did not come from the government, but came from society and came from corporations. In a wonderful passage, in a letter he wrote to one of his friends, Mill said, I love this passage and I love to retell it, Mill said that the editor of the London Times should be whipped till he was bloody for what he'd said. Mill is a very complex character, and his understanding of freedom of speech, I think, is something that we could well learn from if we read it more carefully and in a more complex way than we do. The second thing, if that's all right, second thing that I'd say is, and it relates to the shoe, it relates to the shoe on Gail Bynes' book. I know Gail, and I actually don't like the colour terribly much for various reasons, which I just will expand on. But I asked her why the shoe was on the front cover of the book, and she said, because the company thought it would sell. And I said, do you like it? And she said, no. The shoe on the cover of the book is a fetish shoe, and what it reminds me of is something where you say, are you only concerned about sex? What it reminds me of is the shoe that's used in crush videos in the United States, which are now considered to be legal to sell and to distribute. Crush videos are videos made of people wearing those type of shoes, crushing their animals to death in great pain and suffering. And I'm also concerned about crush videos and torture animals and so forth. And I'm sorry, it's not a terribly pleasant topic to raise. But it's
No, it's not related to
no, but what I'm saying is, it is a form of pornography, isn't it, don't you think?
I think so.
So, but all I'm saying is that it's not merely, I'm sorry, I don't know, ask me, are you one of the things that you're asking is, are you only concerned about sex? Well, no.
Thank you. Right,
I
yes.
just wanted to add...
who are you asking?
just generally.
The whole panel
I
again.
wanted to add to the gentleman over there, he was talking about terrorism. I'd like to add euthanasia and see what people think about that. It's a very good point. The right of people. Do we have the right to learn about euthanasia?
Who wants to respond to that one? It's a bit off the beaten track, but yes.
I was going to answer the previous question anyway, but it sort of fits in with what I had in mind to say. I'm interested in both John Stuart Mill. He was also the one who said that the only right the state has to interfere with the liberty of individuals is to protect them from other people, not from themselves. In answer to the question about what should be available online, if truly democratic country, what adults want to watch and look at should be a matter for themselves. The reason we have laws in relation, for instance, to child pornography is because child pornography is the evidence of the abuse of children. Okay, you can't produce child pornography without abusing children, unless it's computer generated, and that's only a very small part of the market. So there are valid reasons for having laws in relation to that sort of material, because somebody's getting hurt to produce that material. But in relation to any other material, if it's consenting adults, whether it's about euthanasia or whether it's about adult porn or anything else, that material should be available, and it should be up to people to view what they want to view, and not to the state to tell us what we can or cannot view.
And can I ask a follow-up question to
You
that?
have a question at the back?
It's a follow-up question to what you
Yes,
just said.
sure.
How does that work when the viewer is not an adult, is a child or a teenager? Should they be able to determine what they see?
I think that comes down to parental responsibility, quite frankly.
And at what point does that stop applying parental responsibility? At what
At what
point?
age?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that will depend to a certain extent on the sort of material. I mean, material which is available in adult shops, like DVDs, etc. I mean, there is a classification system, and obviously there are age restrictions in relation to any form of movies as to what people can view at what age. But I don't think you can justify bringing in laws that affect everybody in order to protect one part of society.
So is it possible to have a filter to stop children looking at porn?
No filter is going to work 100%. There's no filter technology in the world which works 100%.
Thank you very much.
Now, we're getting on in time. There's time for two more questions only. That's from you at the back, ma'am.
Thank you. I missed some of the discussions tonight. I'm a child advocate, and I am concerned about even this, no disrespect to you, sir, but this good and this bad element of porn and that kind of thing, like naughty and nice. Where does harm come into it? And the harm of children who are watching it, or children that are involved in it, or even adults that are involved in porn? Where does it come down to? Because I don't think you can just go, is it good or is it bad? I think that is too simplistic, and I just don't think, but what about the harm? Like what this lady said about children that are seeing adult content, how do we do that without, I just don't understand how it can just be good or bad, and we try and monitor it from that level. Surely harm is most important in our society. Harm to people in porn and harm to people who are watching porn.
I'm not sure when you came in, but okay, I think that might have been covered by a couple of the earlier speakers. So anyway, Elena would like to respond.
Porn, like any other workplace, is regulated by industrial relations, and if there is harm happening in a workplace, then it is the role of the regulator, the Fair Work Ombudsman, to get involved at that point. Regulating the outcome does not change the industrial relations scenario that occurred when it was being filmed. It's totally the wrong end to regulate the outcome of porn. Porn industry, like the sex industry, needs to be regulated on industrial relations level. I know that in the censorship of sex worker communications online, verbally, and those kinds of things, the only people who are regulating us in that way are the police. And police involvement in our lives causes a great deal of harm. It causes harm to ourselves, to our workplaces, to our families, and to our children. So I think there's the word harm is really broad. You know, eating McDonald's is harmful. What's more harmful for the sex worker who takes her kids to McDonald's? The McDonald's she eats or the job she does? You know, these are the kind of arbitrary way up of good versus bad that I just don't think a group of people sitting in a room as a regulatory class have a right to decide on behalf of other people. In New South Wales, there is mandatory reporting of if a child is at risk of harm and you are interacting on any level with that family as any kind of service provider, whether that be sex worker, peer education or anything else, there's already mandatory reporting of that way if the child is at risk of harm. And I guess I'll pose the question back to you. What more could possibly be put in as a regulation except that if a child is at risk of harm, there is mandatory reporting to docs and intervention that is backed up by criminal law, and that already exists in New South Wales.
Is anyone else? Yes.
I think that was about access though, wasn't it? Not much.
Yeah.
I think I take a very different view to Elena.
Sorry, can I just add, what I mean is if a child is being harmed by access to something on the internet, that's the same as a child being harmed in any other familial situation, and any third party has the power to report that a child is at risk of harm to dogs, whether that be about access on the internet, what the child's being fed, where the child is living, any of those things. So there already exists that mandatory reporting if a child is at harm of accessing something that is harmful to them.
There's quite a bit of truth in that. Obviously, not everyone is a mandatory reporter under New South Wales Care and Protection Act, but I do think that the issue of harm is central. It's a separate question to the good versus bad, and I think that discussion was had as regards the censorship issue and the failure of an internet filter. What I think, where I do take issue with Eleanor, is that there are some products, when they're consumed exactly the way that they're intended to be consumed, are harmful, and cigarettes is an example of that. And the law develops slowly over time to impose liability, for example, for products which are harmful, and product liability in cases involving thalidomide and more recently with big tobacco. I simply observe that there is any environment in which an adult would expose a child to harmful pornography would be an environment, and an adult would be someone who is capable of being reported to the child protection authorities. But your question also raises a very interesting point about the liability of products which, when used exactly as they're intended, might harm individuals. And I'm thinking that very available pornography online, which might be very hardcore and which could be harmful to people like Marcus or others like him, that there is the potential for the law to recognise over time the liability of the manufacturers of that pornography for any harm that is occasioned to individuals. And I think that's something that we might see into the future.
And not just as one right of reply, we know that cigarettes cause cancer because there's research and evidence. The notion that porn causes harm is simply an advocacy position. There is no evidence to prove that, and that is where we fall on the difference between actually having a position that is backed up by a body of work that is generally understood, that we all understand is the evidence and the scientific, social research, whatever you might want to call it, proof, compared to just academics who are putting an advocacy position. 25,000 pieces of paper were delivered to the Ontario High Court about whether or not sex work was harmful per se in Canada. And on those 25,000 pieces of paper, it was ruled that the argument that sex work is harmful to sex workers was an advocacy position that was put by people who were very passionate, but there was no body of work to back it up. And the material that was being put forward by sex worker advocates that criminalisation and police involvement in the industry is harmful was backed up by epidemiology, social research, peer education, years and years and years of hard data and materials about what is harmful about having regulators in your life. It reduces your human rights, reduces your access to health, and reduces your access to justice. I think that particular judgment is very interesting on weighing up different people's version of harm.
Okay, now this will be the last question to whoever wants it. Who is the lucky last? There doesn't have to be one. If there's no last question, somebody's got their hand up and I can't see it. Yourself. So yes, who are you directing this to?
My question is aimed at Helen, and it actually relates to what Elena was saying. But I obviously haven't read any of the texts you discussed today. But is there any rigorous scientific evidence to support the assertions that you've made today?
Which assertions have you made?
Regarding how harmful pornography can be, how the nature of pornography has become more hardcore over time, and that it has actually indeed desensitized people. Rather than one-off cases, I know you gave an illustrative example, but that in general it is desensitizing people to potentially harmful things such as pedophilia.
And the point about Marcus is he wasn't a paedophile. He didn't have paedophilia tendencies.
Sorry, consumers of child pornography.
Yeah, but that's a very different thing, and that's actually one of the more concerning things about the way the changing nature of pornography is that child pornography is not only consumed by classifiable pedophiles. So I was a little bit worried in the sort of, and I think it's a common view. That I was worried.
He must have gone out of his way to get it. You can't get child porn on the net.
No.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well,
I disagree.
perhaps you could.
Show me the address.
Yeah.
I'll
Send me the
find
URL.
it.
I don't know the child porn. I'm a,
Maybe I could.
Google markets to me, and
Maybe I
child
could
porn
speak.
in my Google.
Thank you. Okay, over to you.
I think if you look at the court records, for example, of child pornography cases in which people are sent to prison are given prison sentences, and those prison sentences are served. If you look at court records in New South Wales or any of the states of Australia, in the state of Ontario, in the country of Canada and the United States, if you look at court records, you can see where people access child pornography.
Can I ask a question?
No, I'm talking.
Can I ask a question?
Wait until Helen Pringle is finished, then you can ask the question.
I was trying to answer your question, that first of all, it's child pornography. One of the worrying, concerning things about child pornography is that it's not being consumed by pedophiles, that it's entered into the mainstream. If you want to see where people find it, I can point you to any, what do you want? You ask for it. I can point you to any number of court cases where it's detailed where people find it and how they find it.
That wasn't my question.
That was mine.
Okay,
That was my
okay, let me.
So, but can
Too
I
many
just ask-
I
radios.
don't support child porn, but, shoot
Well,
the
Okay,
I
but
think it's a good thing if you let Helen Pringle just complete what she has to say. That's up to you. That's
I'm going to try and answer your question. Okay, so you want to know, is there any evidence that pornography is harmful? Now let me be very clear here. My argument doesn't rest on pornography causing something else to happen. So my argument doesn't rest on, the contagious yawn model of pornography, which is somebody reads pornography and rapes. My model rests on the racial vilification model of harm. Racial vilification doesn't have to cause somebody to beat up an Aboriginal in order to be unlawful. And that's under the Anti-Discrimination Act. That's not a criminal act. And there's a bit of a confusion here between summary offences and criminal law. The prostitution laws in New South Wales are under the Summary Offences Act, not under the criminal law. So that's how I view the harm along the lines of racial vilification. Now, I could go into that in great length. I'm going to have to point you cutting out. That's how the part of argument I was pointing to see it along those lines.
But there's no sort of body of work that indicates that the harm is leading people to child pornography.
Well, child pornography is a harm, isn't it?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is consumers of pornography, it's not like a gateway drug to child porn.
I don't know how many pedophiles they're interviewing on their involvement in child pornography use, but I don't think there's a census from pedophiles saying, how did you get involved in child pornography? You know what I mean? To comment on this gentleman's question about where do I find child porn, you don't just Google child porn and expect it to pop up. These sites are usually shut down before everyone knows about it.
You're asking a question.
That's why I asked the question.
I just wanted to point out that the cases in Australia and the cases in Canada that Helen refers to are about people networking together and sharing files directly of child pornography. It's not about people accidentally stumbling across stuff on the internet. It's the active sharing of information. The other thing I would like to say about the idea that pornography is like sexual, are you saying gendered vilification in the same way that racial vilification? Well, there's a problem here. And the problem here that the Racial Vilification Acts were argued for people of minority races who were being oppressed and supported by allies who supported those people. Porn actors, porn stars and sex workers are not arguing that our work is vilification. The people who are arguing for it are people who are pro-regulation and don't represent us. So there's a major difference with the historical positioning of racial vilification laws compared to any law that might outlaw pornography.
Now, at this point, I would like to say a couple of things. The aim of the Roundtable Forum series is to raise consciousness on issues of importance to thinking people. The thinking people, that's why we're here. And in that sense, they have been successful. And since you're going to leave this room thinking more vividly and more incisively about a whole lot of things that previously might have been a little bit more vague, in that sense, the forum has been a success. And the speakers, the panel, has been of immense value, I feel, in representing a cross-section of opinions. It is an incredibly complex issue, this. Now, I would say I'm grateful to Elena Jeffreys when she mentioned, when she raised a challenge. She mentioned the Marquis de Sade, and she said, basically what she was saying when she mentioned the Marquis de Sade was, is there anything really new in the universe just because we have a new medium? Now, I think part of the challenge raised by Dr. Helen Pringle is, for me, summarised in this question: is society organically different from what it used to be because of a new medium? In other words, has society undergone an organic moral mutation, or has it not? Or are we just seeing a hall of mirrors? Are we just seeing more of the same thing that happened before, presented by a different type of medium, which is now the internet, which we never had before in history, as the democratization of the media, as Andrew Patterson very aptly said, we now have the democratization of knowledge through the internet. The internet is a mixed blessing. It's a multifaceted thing. It's like the curate's egg. Parts of it are excellent. Now, in my book buying days, when I used to go and buy books from private estates, I once went and visited an elderly lady who lived in the eastern suburbs, and she was selling me things that had belonged to her 91-year-old brother who was in hospital. And the things that she had were quite interesting. One of them was a collection of song sheets from the 90s. This all happened 25 years ago. One of them was, he was 91 then, so he may not be around anymore. One of them was a collection of song sheets from the 1920s, which were very evocative of the 1920s, so I hung on to them because they were really from a different era. The other was a collection of soft porn magazines, which she offered me, and she said, I want to get rid of these, she said, because my brother, my 91-year-old brother, is in hospital, and he can't wait to get out of hospital so that he can get back to his porno collection. and I thought, my God, being younger then, being much younger, I'm still under 91 by the way, but being younger then, I thought, my God, there's hope for us all. So she said, for God's sake, get it out of the house. I don't want any money for it, just get it out of the place, so that when he just can't wait to start buying off his porn collection. I thought, this man's 91, well, maybe there's nothing wrong with him, maybe there is. So the point about it is, you don't know how another person views the universe. And that 91-year-old gentleman who couldn't wait to get back to his soft porn, I don't think it was hard porn. I don't think it was hard porn. Looking at it, it was not. But obviously, he just couldn't wait. and she was looking on it with horror, being a lady from a past generation, whatever. Look, I don't know enough about the internet as a medium to issue any final verdict. The jury for me is still out, because I'm obviously a troglodyte and a Luddite, and I do live in a past era, and I'm proud of that, and I'm not apologising whatsoever. It's comfortable where I live, and I'm aware that there's a new universe swirling around my ankles somewhere, which one day will engulf me if I live long enough. I don't know whether society